Humans have a ton of instincts, things that compel us to behaviors, sometimes against our will. Most of us are familiar with social instincts and food instincts and sex instincts, but there is also a humor instinct. It makes sense from a physiological immune system kind of way. Whenever we laugh, aside from that funny feeling in our brain, it's kind of a tension and release effect. When we tighten up our diaphragm and many of our muscles, then we release and relax our muscles and take a few breaths of fresh air. It serves as a kind of relief valve for tension. The more tension we feel, the more likely we'll laugh at silly things we wouldn't otherwise laugh at. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. Those with a humor instinct would have a kind of a safety valve to bleed off excess stress. Doctors and researchers have known for years that stress is a silent killer. It's responsible for most illnesses and wreaks havoc on our immune system. Noam Chomsky came up with the idea that we have a language instinct, that we have some kind of grammar organ in our brain. One of the ways he expressed this was through the idea of transformational grammar, that our deep thoughts have the same basic structure as our expressed language. But when we take our thoughts and express them as words, they have to go through a kind of transformation. Chomsky expressed this in great detail, showing the specific structure of our thoughts, which he called deep structure, to the specific structure of our spoken language, which he called surface structure. One idea that is common among historians is that our ancient instincts worked perfectly for hunters and gatherers, but they don't work nearly as well in modern societies. One example of this is that ancient tribal societies were pretty small, only a couple hundred people. Once they got too big, they kind of split in half and went their separate ways. This kind of makes sense, as other animals that are highly social, like bees and ants, tend to do the same thing. When they get too big, they split into two daughter colonies. But in modern times, the same instincts that helped ancient humans survive sometimes have the opposite effect. They say there are two kinds of instincts: the kinds of instincts we are programmed with, and the kinds of instincts that we can learn. Anything that you can practice to the point of unconscious competence can be considered a learned instinct, a new instinct. Like practicing the piano, for example, until you know a song by heart. When you are in the practicing stage, you need most of your conscious brain to watch carefully where you put your fingers and to listen carefully to the sounds they make. If you practice long enough, you can turn your conscious mind off and think about something else while your unconscious can make beautiful music. This means anything you practice enough can be turned into a new instinct. You can create a new instinct to make lots of money. You can create a new instinct to have lots of sex with sexy people. You can create a new instinct to express yourself creatively and assertively. You can create a new instinct to invent life-saving technology. You can create a new instinct that will make you do great things so that you can enjoy great rewards. When large societies start, it's common to follow the leader of any large society like we did in ancient hunter-gatherer societies. We even expect modern leaders to distribute wealth like ancient tribal leaders did. But the difference is that ancient tribal leaders actually led us to get wealth, to go out and kill some big animal. Then when we all came back home, the leader would direct who got what pieces of that externally acquired wealth. But all modern leaders take wealth from within the society and redistribute it. This continues until no more wealth remains and the society collapses. This is precisely why every modern society has a long-term survival rate of exactly 0. Once Noam Chomsky published his theory on transformational grammar, especially the parts about surface structure and deep structure, it was misinterpreted. People started seeing deep structure and surface structure in ways Chomsky didn't intend. So if you go look up transformational grammar on Wikipedia, for example, you'll find it's been changed to D structure and S structure. Chomsky meant this as a purely specific label for linguistic structures and nothing more. Perhaps we have an instinct to read between the lines so that you can find hidden meanings here. Most humor is based on ambiguity. For example, if you can create a short sentence or a question and answer where one word means two different things within that short phrase, it triggers the humor response. Why is 6 afraid of 7? 7 ain't 9. What did the beach say when the tide came in? Long time no see. Why did the student study on an airplane? He was in high school. What building has the most stories? The library. But when you take the ambiguity and stretch it out longer than our brain space, it stops being funny and it starts to get really confusing. The most famous ambiguous sentence is, time flies like an arrow. Time flies like an arrow. Time flows fast like an arrow flows fast. Time flies like an arrow. There are fruit flies, house flies, horse flies, and time flies. Those time flies like an arrow. Time flies like an arrow. If you got a job in a lab measuring the speed of flies, you'd ask your boss how to do that. He'd look at your resume and say you used to have a job measuring the speed of an arrow. So he would tell you to measure the speed of flies like you measure the speed of an arrow, or to time flies like an arrow. Similarly, if you had the same job but no speed measuring experience, he might send you to see your coworker who happened to be an arrow. Then he'd tell you to measure the speed of flies like that arrow over there was measuring the speed of flies, or to time flies like an arrow.